everything that we had going was because we were trying to achieve something. And like the bindings, the base plates were so thick, and we just wanted to skateboard, right? And so skateboarders got to feel their boards. And so we figured that riding rails and doing all the stuff we were doing, we wanted to feel the board. So we didn't see a need for a base plate.
Welcome to Going Off, a podcast about snowboard history.
As the early days of snowboard culture slide into the past, we're documenting its oral history.
We're tracing back what made it so strange and explosive, why it changed all those lives and still bonds people for life.
From the history of snowboard fashion to how half-pipes were born.
From the birth of jibbing to movies, music, and magazines.
Each episode drops in on something new. I'm one of your hosts, Tricia Burns.
And I'm your other host, Jennifer Shurowski. We've traveled the world together for decades, riding and just living the way of life we call snowboarding. And now we're ready to get in the Wayback Machine. I think we're recording now.
Let's fucking go off.
Oh man, I don't know what's going on. All right, Tricia, what are we talking about today?
Yes. Okay. So, Jen, today we are going to talk about the history of the modern snowboard binding. This is going to be a rough and loose history of coming at you from two of your least tech-minded binding savvy friends. I feel like both of us, we've been riding binding since the 1980s, 80s, 90s, and all the way up until today. And I feel like the two of us, I might be speaking out of turn here, but we're both more of a set up whatever we've got kind of snowboarders. And like I couldn't
put them on and go.
Yeah. And I, unlike Kelly Clark can attest to this, she would be like my binding tech, but I would just take the exact same bindings and like move them to the next board, to the next board, to the next board until like Frankensteining them together to not actually have to like deal with them.
Same.
So that said, we had a great chance to connect with some major movers and shakers in the history of binding development and technology, and some super awesome history buffs and collectors who help kind of set us straight or give us enough information to get us in trouble, basically. We chatted with Burden OG binding and boot engineer, now electric airplane builder, Chris Doyle. And Doyle was basically at the top of every pipe. He worked with Craig Kelly. He worked with Terry Hawkinson, trying to build and tweak and help support like what the riders wanted at Burton. So he was a great resource for us. And then we talked to Trent Bush, who started Wave Clothing and Twist and curates the Snowboard History Museum in Vail. And he just has a solid collection of vintage gear. So he helped set us straight. And Dennis Nazari, who owns Salty Peaks and also a snowboard history museum there with like, I guess, the world's biggest collection of snowboards and bindings. So I haven't been there, but we need to go apparently. Mm-hmm. And then anyone else who would give us their old binding stories. And later we're going to talk to Russell Winfield, our real life expert, to just talk some binding banter. And, he's been riding bindings for as long as we have and has a lot to say. So here, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about early bindings. So this is highbacks, lowbacks. Do you remember those, Jen?
Oh, I do.
Skybacks, nobacks, baseless bindings, forward lean, whole pattern, step in, step ons, the channel system, and a few zany ideas that also came up along the way. We're not going to talk about alpine bindings or splitboard bindings just yet because that would just blow our minds.
I know you're dying and you're waiting for it. Don't worry. That's to come. So why do we want to talk about bindings? Like, why do we care? Snowboarding's roots are in skateboarding and surfing, and like the proto-snowboard was a snurfer, and none of those things used binding. So neither did early snowboarders for a while, but eventually we realized like, we can't turn this thing. We can't control our snowboards the way we want to without something to like attach us to the board and give us a little leverage and response. And also, let's be real, basically being invited to participate in ski resorts and be resort legal is something that is driving, the innovation of the binding too. And sure, like the binding's kind of maybe a little bit unsexy, I was thinking, but it's also this like beautiful unsung hero, because without it, we're not going far. Like we're not doing 98% of the things that we have in the past half century. And you know, in the development of the modern binding, it's a really fascinating story, honestly, in snowboard history. And you know, Travis Rice of Natural Selection and one of the best snowboarders of all time fame he's gone on record saying, like, you don't have snowboarding without the binding, you know, kind of just saying, like, you know, think of the things that he's doing, and you know, he's not doing that on the snurfer. Picture this. It's 1965. I Feel Fine by the Beatles is the #1 song on the charts. You're in a snow-covered field. You're riding a snurfer. This is the quote-unquote toy that Sherman Poppin is credited to have invented for his daughter that year. It cost $15. It's around the size of a water ski. You stand sideways on it. It's no bindings, just staples and rubber footing. And they had strings on them, right? String on the nose. That helps you stay attached and kind of control it.
That was your control element.
Air quotes everywhere here. Pretty hard. It was pretty hard to control, but it was fun enough for some backyard shenanigans. You know, side note, in the 1930s, there was a brand apparently called Snow Surf that had a back foot binding, which was kind of way ahead of its time. But it doesn't look like this, from what we can tell, influenced Sherman Poppin in his kind of work that he was doing with the snurfer. So we're 1965, we're hanging out, backyard shenanigans. Let's fast forward a couple years into the 70s. And we've had a few years of snurfing. And, you know, there's some other brands, some actual snowboard brands at play here emerging on the scene. And we're now like, we need a better way to keep our feet on the board. We're still not talking about formal bindings in any traditional sense here. So in the 70s, Winter Stick features a gravel. Their system to attach you to the board is this gravel grip, probably kind of like grip tape, that, you know, makes it so your boots don't slide around on the board. And then this single nylon strap that secures both your feet. So like one long strap that goes over both of your feet. And apparently it had a ski brake on it. I can't really picture how it would work. Yeah. We have a Tricia, you found an example of the ad so we can see what the top looks like. So I don't know what the bottom looks like. But anyway, apparently we're going on record as saying it had a ski brake. So meaning if you
drop it in the comments.
It would stop. And then we're getting into the late 70s. We've got Jake Burton coming into plays, firing up Burton, and he's he's launching his brand, and he updates the snurfer design, and the way the technology he's using to like get people to connect with the board is a rubber foot strap, similar to kind of like a water ski boot for the front foot, and then just like one rubber strap for the back that you would like slip your back foot under. And, you know, this actually becomes one of his early patents. You know, as we ease on through history into the early 80s, Tom Sims ups the game even further he engineers 2 straps to go over each foot. So each foot has kind of like a toe strap and a heel strap in a way. And this gives you even more control. But this is, you know, the kind of riding they're doing is still very much like off-resort, snurfer-esque, head out to the golf course type riding. Around 83, resorts are starting to be like, you can come here with that if you want. And this, like I was saying before, starts to really drive a necessity for binding progression, because if you're on a ski resort, you're going to be around a bunch of other people. You really have to be able to control the board. And also, like, you're on packed snow. Like, if you're out on the golf course or in the woods, you're likely in loose snow, which you can maybe treat it more like a surfboard. But if you're and if this is the East Coast, we're talking ice.
We're talking, it snowed, then it rained, then we're on it.
And it's blue. So let's be honest. So we need something that's going to really help us control what we're going to do.
Yeah, so by 82, 83, like every board on the market has some sort of base plate and toe strap ankle system. So these are 2 separate plates, like a toe plate and a heel cup kind of thing. So it's nothing like the modern binding. It's almost not like a ski binding, but the concept of two separate pieces, one for your toe and your heel. And collectively at this time, the whole snowboard community is trying to improve the control that early snowboards have on the snow. Kind of what you're saying, like we're hitting resorts. We want a little more control. We need to like prove to the resort gods, I guess, that we are legit and can turn and control the snowboard on a resort. So in 1983, the Burton catalog markets the Burton Performer with the nylon ankle straps as, quote, ideally suited for tricks and jumps.
Ooh.
So, freestyling is coming on board here. And it also features triple fins for holding carved unpacked snow. So this is sort of nodding that we're starting to directly speak to that resort rider in the catalogs. And so I want to say that they needed more edge control, but as we just mentioned, they didn't have edges. They had fins, which to describe a fin, it had two metal little bars on the heel and toe side of each board, and then a metal fin, small fin in the middle, in the back. And this is their idea of creating
Kind of like
control.
a rudder, right?
Like a rudder
In a way?
/ surfboard concept.
Yeah.
Again, we're like still merging the snow idea with like surf, skate, ski, but it really just creates kind of more drag. I haven't ridden one of those, so I don't know, but I don't know if it gave you that much more quote unquote control. But starting in 1984, Burton you can special order a Burton Performer with steel edges. So you see this, we're starting to get like coming from snow surfing essentially to like a little more ski centric using ski technology.
Okay. It's time to talk about an oft contested piece of snowboard history.
Dun, dun, dun.
So let's talk about the great highback debate. We have two inventors in two different countries at around the same time inventing what is probably the single most important contribution to the snowboard experience after metal edges, I would imagine. So we have Louis Fournier, aka Lofo. He's Quebecois. He's from Canada. And then Jeff Grell, who is lives in Colorado. He lives in Aspen. So these two players are both getting in and nerding out and engineering their own sort of fix for their own, their own purposes, really, because they're like, I need some more control. So we'll start with Lofo. So this is 1982. He leaves the National Snowboard Championships at Suicide 6, and he was at that event clocked going 64 miles per hour, which is so wild. How was he going that
in
fast
your
on Suicide 6? And isn't Suicide 6 like a hill?
Small hill. Yeah. But
impressive at any rate on the equipment that they were likely riding. But so he starts, obviously realizing like, I got to figure this out. We're missing something. So he starts this long series of kind of trial and error, trying to create a stiffer boot. Everyone's heelside turns were washing out. It was really, no one could do a heelside turn. Yeah, because you didn't have any bit of leverage to put it up on edge. So he's kind of trying all these different things. He used metal toe clips. He's shoved aluminum in his boots, and that was too stiff. Then he moved on to something called crazy carpet, stuffed inside fishing boots. But the boots were like all big and clunky.
They go from sneakers to like massive boots, like.
Yeah, exactly. And then he tried to use like things like fiberglass and saran wrap, and he's trying to work on an inner boot brace that's going to provide that support that he is craving. Nothing really worked. So in the spring of 83, it became evident that, that support that he needed, it had to come from outside of the boot. And that's where the concept of the external highback gelled in his mind.
Yeah. And so at the same time, 83, basically 82, 83, out west in Aspen, Jeff Grell, who's a flight snowboard pro rider, he's working his own version of the highback. In 1983, March of 83, Aspen Highlands opens to snowboarding. And about the same time, Jeff Grell creates these cuffs that are attached to the boot. So they're basically, he took a Lang Banshee, which is a ski boot with a lot of buckles on it, and he cut those off and he modified these with a lower strap to control tension and support. So they were more like leg braces that you attached on. And then after riding these for a while, Grell decided it was time to produce them. So he went out and bought a bunch of like polyethylene, cut them out, modified the shape using a blowtorch to heat and soften the plastic. And then at the local ski shop in Aspen, he gets some guys to rivet the straps on. And then he made about 25 to 30 of these. And these were the first quote unquote production highbacks. And the spelling is Hybaks because it's radical, dude.
Yeah, I love it.
And again, like you mentioned, winning these contests, it was a competitive scene. And so people were really looking for that competitive edge. And so for that first season that he had the highbacks, Hybaks, he kept them kind of to himself. So he could have a competitive edge. And he went out to the 1984 Worlds in Tahoe and took second behind Terry Kidwell. And Grell was the only rider out there with a highback device. But like years later, Kidwell's like, hey, I had some like homemade brace tucked into my boots as well. So everyone, again, is like, this community is collectively thinking like, how can we get more support, more edge, more, control? In 1984, Flight, when they're out of Newport, Rhode Island, run by Steve and Dave Dara, they advertised the highback. And, he would share this new technology with his friends like Chris Carroll, Dave Alden, Evan Feen, Bob Klein, and Dave Weaver. So like note these names because these are big names in the like early days of snowboarding with different brands. So this is spring of 85 because Aspen and Breck are sort of the places to be in the snowboard scene. Chris Carroll, who we just mentioned, he was an original Burton rider, and Dave Weaver was working with Tom Sims. And so Jeff Grell was like, he showed Dave what he was riding and then turned him onto the design. And then Dave went back and basically attached Grell's design to the Sims existing base plate. So, we're mashing up ideas here.
Yeah. And that time, like that spring of 85 in Aspen or in Colorado, like it was going off because like a lot of the snowboarders from all over the country were passing through. And similarly, Andy Coughlin, East Coast legend. Andy the Dog Coughlin, he was my coach. I love Andy. He has this story he tells about basically the same event. He's like, the first time I saw the highbacks, HYBAK, was when we went out to Aspen and Jeff Grell had them, and he was kind of he was kind of half-heartedly telling us like, hey, you should try this. And Andy was like, it was totally different. This sort of white piece of plastic, and he's like, I don't want to sound evil or anything, but I instantly copied it.
These are awesome. Let's go.
Yeah, he went back to the East Coast and back in the shop in Vermont. He's like, we told Jake, and, he thought it was a great idea. And so we started cutting up a 5-gallon plastic bucket and we just riveted them to the backs of our bindings. And then boom, this idea had like instantly spread to both coasts.
Yeah.
So that very same year of 1985, Lofo, our Quebecois inventor, he gets second place at the Stratton U.S. Open slalom. And Tricia, you found this awesome photo where he's like holding up his board. There was like 5 gates at this thing because no one could do a heelside turn. But anyway,
every event is a downhill.
Oh yeah, just point it. But like he, as I said, he's holding up his board, and the photo shows him and his trophy and this highback that he'd engineered. And I love this little like tidbit that the first convertible highback was born out of his necessity to fit his board in the back of his teeny little Renault 5 without unbolting the binding. How French Canadian of him.
And
so
just
awesome.
Necessity is the mother of invention. You're like, I need to get my snowboard in the car.
Yeah, you got to fit it in the mini car. There's 4 asterisks next to this little note that we did not want to go without saying, which is just that there was a brand called Prop Snowboards that also reportedly had a version of the highback around these same early days. So we've got multiple players at the same time, and it's that idea from anthropology, the collective consciousness, when like sort of innovations are happening in multiple places at once, and it's like the human brain has just developed enough to be like, we all need this. So by that fall, we're talking heading into the next season. So we've got 1985, 1986 season. Sims, this is a big deal. Sims releases what we're calling the modern binding as we know it. And it serves really as the template for kind of the binding all the way up until now. Like you can still find versions of basically, it's not all that dissimilar to what this binding had in idea and concept, which is just, it's this black and white binding. It's got folding highbacks, like highbacks are today. The highback's attached to a base plate with like a heel cup. It's got a toe and ankle strap. So, a binding. In 85, Burton, to just kind of show you where Burton's at during the same season, it has a binding that has a two-piece ankle and toe strap that have ratchet bindings. So, kind of easier to tighten it up and loosen it up, but they don't have a high back. And the quote unquote snowboard boot is called a riding shoe, and it looks like a hiking boot, which is is wild. 1986, Burton releases the high top binding. It's a one-piece binding. Does this have a high back? Talk about this binding.
Yeah, the 1986 high top binding is a one-piece binding. It's basically it's like the binding I visualize when I think of like early binding. It's black or red, and it's just one piece, no flexibility, no bend, no tilt or anything. It really just looks like a foot brace, for lack of a better description, but it has these fast tech buckles, which really helped, like strap it down. And that was a big invention in the binding technology too.
And those were like luggage straps, right? Where you just go like click.
Yeah, clip. Yeah. And kind of what you're talking about with LoFo in the car. In the Burton catalog from like 85, 86, I'm not sure, but they have their board bag looks like a tent that goes over your snowboard because the highbacks don't fold, so it's really shaped to the shape of an upright binding that you slip into a bag.
That sounds awkwardly shaped for sure. By 1986, though, so, within the realm of 85, 86 season, and pretty much everyone has a highback. It's like within 1 year, essentially, of that spring when, Grell's got his invention, like almost everyone has one. So it spread quickly.
The turnaround is very quick. And in the early days, they're tested in the spring and on the market in the fall.
Yeah. Stuff's not being made in China.
No, it's being made. It's being patched together at local ski shops and garages.
Yep.
So yeah, fun little fact about the board vault, by the way, is amazing for these old catalogs. So if you want to see anything that we're talking about, go to theboardvault.com. But they had the old catalog from 1987 with a 165 cruiser with buckle bindings cost $319. They also offered a 175 cruiser. So we're talking like enormous.
Yeah, that's wild. It must have weighed so much. I wonder how much that thing weighed.
Yeah. Another thing I kind of wanted to mention was that I know we're not going to talk about alpine binding, but we should say that there were some freestyle icons who in the 80s who were riding plate bindings, who were riding hard boots essentially. And they probably weren't that hard, but just again, like this idea of needing that support that like a ski boot could give you, or like that back support, like Damian Sanders, Steve Graham.
Legends.
Yeah. I'm like, who else was freestyle? I feel like their boots are unbuckled, though.
Yeah. I mean, their attitude was unbuckled boots.
Unbuckled.
I don't know.
So it's also interesting to note that these early days of snowboarding, there was a collective push for technology and a super quick turnaround. So things were invented in the spring and for sale in the fall. And patents were pending all over the place. So everybody wanted to have like an ownership in the market. In the nearly 50 years of existence that Burton's been around, it holds 130 different binding component patents, including the first rubber strap that we talked about. It's literally, the patent is just a rectangle with dimensions penciled around it. Chris Doyle showed it to me. It's pretty sweet, but you're like,
feels like a pretty simple thing to patent.
Yeah, but at the time that was revolutionary, like everything. Yeah. Another interesting tidbit that I think we kind of touched on a little bit is that Sims was like a real leader in technology. In our history of Halfpipe, we kind of talk about how Tom Sims is notorious for his comments about not being a good businessman, but his product was way ahead of the offerings that Burton had in that early time. In that 1985 binding, it's kind of what we're writing today. And also on that 1985 Sims binding, there was forward lean with 2 different hole patterns on the back, giving riders an option for forward lean. So this is the first time, like once the binding gets going, we're already starting to feel that need for forward lean, for more control. And at that point, riders are still modifying the forward lean by shoving things into their bindings and boots like soccer shin guards and kind of like Terry Kidwell was talking about. You're just jamming stuff in there to get it stiff.
This is relatable because I remember it was a little bit later. It was probably more like 89, but I was riding these like shitty off-market Sorels, and I remember my dad cut up like little square pieces of carpet and shoved them in like to just stiffen them up. So
Yeah.
that was like chill. That's like what everyone was out there just trying to like shove shit in their boots
Make it
to get a little more.
fit, tweak it,
Yeah.
comfort, performance. Like now everything's dialed. We don't realize how important like comfort and rideability was back then.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk what other mods were happening. So now we've got a binding. How are we tweaking on it to make it work better and kind of fit our like what's demanded by the kind of riding we want to do? Forward lean, as you mentioned, is kind of what it sounds like. It forces your leg forward, so that you have more with more of a bent leg. You have more response on heelside turns, basically. So this idea of forward lean, Tom Sims is already hip to it. Burton's sort of approach to this in the 80, 86, 87 season was just to kind of stick foam pads to the backs of their highbacks. So these like big yellow or red kind of foam stuck on, sort
Cushions?
of pads. Yeah,
Yeah.
cushions. Yeah, it wasn't for comfort. It was for forward lean at the top of the binding. Sims, Burton, Barfoot, Snowtech, Kemper, they're all tweaking on what they've got until the big season of 1990 when Burton releases the freestyle binding, which is a big deal. It's the first freestyle binding in snowboarding. It has FLAD, which is an acronym for forward
Sounds
lean
awesome.
adjuster. Yeah, it's a techie acronym for forward lean adjuster. This also marks a shift in the sport towards a more freestyle focus, and this is versus racing. So now we're kind of moving more into a freestyle mindset about the kind of riding we want to do, and the product addressing the requirements of the freestyler in 1990 specifically. So what are those requirements? Like tweakability, duh, and just flex and things like that. But we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But right now we need to address the releasable binding concept. So releasable bindings, that's what else has releasable bindings? Skis.
What are
so
those?
when you fall, you've got your skiing down the hill and you fall, your skis pop off. And so your like little legs don't get all torn apart. But for a hot minute, in the early days of snowboarding, a few inventors, quote unquote, were trying to push for releasable snowboard binding, as in you fall, your board pops off your feet. And this idea obviously is coming from skiing, like I mentioned, but a big player in this movement is Earl Miller, who has the Earl Miller Ski Company. And this guy, he's big in the pioneering days of skiing. He helped plan the original Sundance ski area. He was the inventor of the ski brake, and he held 100 patents, including the snowboard release binding. And so he went around. He was like proselytizing this idea of like releasable bindings. He went around and tried to sue all these ski areas to make them enforce releasable bindings as the standard, basically like under the guise of safety. Like it's not safe without these releasable bindings. He's threatening that mountains like won't be able to get insurance if they don't require the releasable binding. But he conveniently had the patent to the releasable binding, which is pretty interesting. And it's an odd idea to think that we could be living in an alternate universe where you have like you fall and
double
your
eject.
snowboard,
No,
your
thank
snowboard
you.
ejects off your feet. But this guy he was obsessed. I think we could say he was a bit obsessed with it. He created a book. Lance Violetta, artist, and just amazing snowboard graphics god. We talked to him for our history of snowboard graphics episode, and he has a copy of this book actually, and it's called Snowboard Deaths. This is done by Earl Miller, and it's a book of case studies, essentially, of all these deaths that have happened at ski resorts of snowboarders that he's attributing to the fact that their board didn't release off their feet. And so he created this book in hopes that it would...
Propaganda.
Yeah, that it would, create, have people leaning in and caring and feeling like this is the right way to go.
Yeah, he has like the original clickbait. There's a video on YouTube too that feels really dark about like just really, bad 90s video editing, but just looks like death and dismemberment will happen unless you have the
Exactly.
releasable binding.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially they were trying to solve for a problem. There's a couple other people in the mix who are playing around with this idea, but they're trying to solve for a problem that didn't exist in snowboarding. Like the leg fractures and the spiral twisting falls that were coming out of skiing, and why the releasable binding for skiing made so much sense. Like, it doesn't really work for snowboarding. But that didn't stop Kurt Hill out of Boulder, Colorado. He also worked on a releasable binding in 84-85, and he got a patent in 1990s for the Hill releasable binding. And these were about like an inch to an inch and a half off the snowboard. So you're like really tall on top of your snowboard and then double ejecting.
That sounds wild.
Tell me more. And then Sean Norris shared a story on Facebook in the old school page. But he went to work. He worked at Vision, but back in the early days in 80-45, he was also playing around with this mounted Spademan plates, which is like a ski plate on the bottom of raised up Sims binding. So again, you're really high off the top of the board. But he also had like a connecting cable between the two bindings. And so when twisting force reached the limit on either foot, the cable would like trigger a spring and you're off. So I mean, just think of like
that sounds dangerous to me.
So gnarly. I think Earl Miller should have done what happens if you ride releasable bindings propaganda video. You will probably die.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I think we can be grateful that these didn't take off. But it should also be noted that in 1991, Jake Burton and Dave Dodge came from the skiing world, and he was an engineer at Burton for a while. But to defend themselves against Miller's creation, they also created their own releasable binding and patented it, and it was granted in 1993. So just like trying to own all the spaces, and it's one of their 285 patents that Burton holds. But I when I was like doing the research on this, I'm like, wait, what? Jake Burton has a patent for the releasable binding, but it's a way to, hold the marketplace and kind of
in case it goes
block
that way.
it too. Yeah. Or keep it from actually going forward.
Oh, yeah. Wow. And I think like this whole conversation circling around this idea of snowboarding is new, coming into ski areas. Who's at ski areas? Skiers. And so
and
it's
what do
like,
they know breaks or
and what do they know
bindings?
skiing? Yeah, and how skis work and things like that. So this is a binding adjacent digression, but we need to talk about the leash.
Yes.
This is not a thing really in the modern snowboard dialect, but back in the late 80s and early 90s, it was required by law. Like I remember we had to wear, and your pass would get pulled by ski patrol if you did not have a leash.
Or the lift guys would come up and like yank on your leash to make sure it was like actually connected to your board. Yeah. Yeah,
and it was a little bit of I remember it being kind of like a fuck you, like if you didn't have it attached. It's kind of like wearing a helmet but not putting
the buckle,
not buckling it. It's a little bit of like, I'm doing it because you asked me to, but I'm also not doing it. But there's they were dumb. Let's be real. They were dumb.
I had a leash sponsor, Bakota. They were cool for like a hot minute.
Yeah, I remember Bakota. But the reason they were dumb is because they were unnecessary. So the thing about a snowboard is like, if you do lose it, it's going to cascade down the hill and probably whack somebody in the head and take them out. But the losing of a snowboard happens when you're carrying it, not really when you're riding it. And, there were like inserts did pull out in the early boards, like in the early 90s. Like there is a world where you could pull your foot off of the snowboard, but then you had your other foot attached, and it's really unlikely that both feet would pull off because you need tension.
But like, as you're saying it, it's sort of interesting because there was a lot of pipe hiking at that time, and
that's true. But you didn't have your leash on when you were hiking. It's not like surfing where the leash was all long. So that is true. But I guess the point is the clincher of why it was dumb is that, okay, so say in this crazy world, both bindings got torn out of the snowboard, your leash was attached to your binding. So then you're
like, bye.
Yeah. So we just clowned on it so hard, and it's widely recognized now. And I think even by like the late 90s, ski resorts were starting to realize like, oh, we didn't understand how these things worked, and this leash just isn't doesn't make sense and isn't effective. And I don't think runaway snowboards is like a real. It's not the
The
problem.
leash
at
isn't going
ski
to stop
resort.
it. It's more like the person who's just learning how to sit down on their snowboard and they put it the wrong way and kick it over or something.
Exactly. And so it's just showing a lack of understanding about what snowboards even were or how they worked. Like
Yeah.
that was the world like you and I were kind of born into, when we first started snowboarding.
Yeah.
Like it was so new. People would see you and be like, what is that thing? A little bit. So anyway, they're coming around. And by, I would imagine, I don't remember the last time I wore a leash, but I imagine it was sometime in
93.
I think I imagine it was sometime in the mid 90s. And then by the early 2000s, it's like, no one's wearing a leash, but actually it becomes this kind of fun retro fashion accessory.
Yeah.
Like remember Air Blaster launched
Yeah.
and Jesse Gronkowski, Travis Parker, Paul Miller and the crew. Preston, yeah, they launched with like a fun, wacky 80s style like leash. So you would just wear it. But yeah, it was just like a fashion accessory. So kind of funny that like arc of like, you have to wear it to like, you don't have to wear it to like, now we're going to wear it.
Because it's
fun.
zany and like throwbacky. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, let's get back to that original 1990 Burton freestyle binding because that thing was a big deal.
Game changer.
This is the answer to Tom Sims' his foldable highback binding. And this is just a reminder of like who's at play at this time. So Craig Kelly has recently gone to Burton from Sims, and Craig has got an engineer's mind. He's getting his engineering degree at the University of Washington, and he has kind of experience with all Tom Sims tech, basically. And he's gone to Burton, and so he's working with he's collaborating, no doubt, with like Jake and the crew on all of this stuff. So this 1990 freestyle binding comes out and sort of changes the game in terms it has like an injection molded high back that curves around and is comfortable. It's got the forward lean adjuster flat and an anatomically contoured heel cup. So like all this stuff that is fine tuned to like fit and functionality so that your heel won't like raise up and get heel lift and things like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's gonna fit your boot really good and means it'll work really good. The following year, in 1991, they add the bone out strap. And this is another step in kind of this freestyle tangent of really revolutionizing binding comfort. It was a real differentiator for Burton in the market. It has two independent straps versus that original Sims binding. It also has a toe strap and heel strap, but they're connected together at the base. So it was all kind of one piece in a way. And these new Burton bone out bindings, they have each of the straps is like independently connected to the base plate, which is how they are now. So it's a lot more comfortable. And then the big thing with the bone out is it has like a hole cut out of the middle of the heel strap so that it could condense down if you're flexing really hard, which is what you do when you tweak. The binding doesn't get all bunched up and cut into your foot, like the top of your foot and stuff. So it's just so much more comfortable. And there is this amazing, like if you look at I think it's the 91 or 92 Burton catalog, there is this photo of Jeff Brushy doing, I think it's a taipan or something.
Oh my gosh, his knee is like on the board. It's
flat on the board. There's just it is amazing, like the contortion that's happening with this like new, just like influx of flexibility technology, we could call it.
Yeah.
And this is just the name of the game of the 90s, tweaking. That's what it was all about. Because remember, like, we're not doing nobody's spinning a 1080. It was about tweaking your grabs and making your riding look like super steezy.
Okay, we're going to talk about highbacks, not just the highback, but lowbacks, nobacks, and skybacks. So these are three sort of quick variations that came into the binding world and left sort of quickly. So in that mid 90s, we enter into skate culture, and skate culture is starting to shape the snowboard space. And they're starting to want to even get rid of the highback so they can get that skate tweakage, basically. And they're starting to T-bolt their bindings for giant stances.
Yeah, it was a big movement because, street skating is getting super big in this period in like the early mid 90s. And so, a lot of snowboarders are skateboarders. And so some of that energy is getting injected in. Remember, that was a time when like skateboarders had tiny little wheels and, snowboarders are bringing that energy and they're doing things like butters and jibs. And nobody's trying to like carve hard on the big mountain. Like it's about like dinking around and buttering and just like being a skater on snow.
The stances on those older boards like did not really give you the skate vibe. If you look at those 1990 videos of Craig Kelly and the whole crew, their knees are basically knocked and their stances are like 18 inches.
Yeah, narrow stance, and they have a lot of forward lean, and it's much more like almost like hard booting in a way. And so this was it's the pendulum swing against that. And, snowboarders saying like, I don't want to have to lean forward. Like I'm trying to just skate around and, do lip tricks and things like that. One component to this idea of skating on snow is like wanting a wider stance. Like you were just referencing Craig Kelly and his like narrow ass stance. And, the equipment just didn't allow that. So we should talk about T-bolting.
Yeah.
That's coming into play. A lot of people are doing it. And it's basically you have to T-bolt your binding to your board when, a factory binding, like the screw holes are either they're damaged, like you've blown them out, or if you want to change your stance width or like how you have your angles set up. So basically what you would do was drill holes in the board
all
and
the way
mount
through.
like hard mount your bindings to your board. And how that would work is there's a thing called like a T-nut that would go into your base, and it would have a T so that it would be anchored into your base, and it would have a threaded insert into it. And then, you'd probably do 4 of those or however many, and then you would put your binding down on the stance that you wanted, and you had like a nut that you would basically like screw into that. And so, people were during this time, and I remember doing this, and I remember being around when like a bunch of my friends were doing it too. It was permanent. It voided your board warranty.
Yeah, big deal.
Parents were not down for this. Like, I feel like I was getting free boards, but my parents were still pissed. They were like, what are you fucking doing? You're ruining your board. And you could see the T part of the T-nut in your base, and you would have to P-tex over top of it because you didn't want it like dragging on the snow or catching and slowing you down. But it was a lot of work, but that's what it was about.
We were down to customize, yeah.
The other thing that would often happen in association with T-bolting your board to a ridiculously wide stance was cutting down your tip and your tail with like a skill saw or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was all just in this effort to get it feeling more skatey. You didn't want a huge tip and tail. You wanted like low profile. And remember the lunch tray? Was that a Moro board?
Yeah, the Moro lunch tray.
So it's a sign of the times. There's a new style being brought into freestyle snowboarding. And, one of the really like the early figures in bringing this style in, this idea of like big pants, fat stance, ride around and jib things and do butters, is Tarquin Robbins. And he rides for aggression. He lives in the Vail Valley at this time. And he's really leading this movement. He's bringing in this kind of like skate urban, kind of like gangster style to snowboarding, honestly. Like I grew up in the Vail Valley and was living there at that time, and the snowboard community was small. And, there was always rumors flying that I remember the year that the rumor was he got busted at a mountain with a gun, carrying a gun.
Gangsta.
And we were all like, damn, he's so badass. And he had that famous 1992 Pro model on aggression that had like the gun on the base and stuff. So you can just feel the shift, the vibe shift happening. It's really happening in Colorado, but kind of all over. Yeah. And this is when Tech 9 Bindings is born. So Ethan Fortier, that's E-Stone or Stony Buds to the layman. He's living in the Vail Valley in the early 90s. One of his friends and roommates was Jason Damaris, also known as J3. There's about like a dozen J's in the valley at the time. And he had, again, he was a tinkerer. He worked at Beaver Creek blowing snow, and he he was into building shit.
Yeah.
So anyway, the whole gang is hanging around Tarquin Robbins. They're friends with him. And there was this idea to have a baseless binding. And the whole thing with that is there's less between you and the board. So it's more like board feel, like you would have on a
board feel,
skateboard.
air quotes. Yeah, everyone talks about board feel like that.
Yeah, because at the time it's like there's bindings were thick and whatever. So the idea was get more board feel. So J3 fabbed it up. And the story goes that Ethan's dad came out to visit and saw the binding and was like, this is awesome. I could sell this. And he helped them get the brand going, basically. And, they had a vibe. They had, the name's Tech Nine. And they started finger on the trigger production. So they're just riffing on this idea of like kind of urban hip hop culture, basically. And, they were one of the few binding only companies. The only other one I can think of is Drake coming out of Italy, and they were bought by Northwave in the late 90s sometime. And I believe they were just bindings.
Yeah.
There was some binding brands that were under the umbrella of a board brand, like Bent Metal was Mervin's binding brand. Later in the 90s, Preston was Ride's binding brand. But, at this time, I feel like Tech Nine was really like kind of singular in what they were, that they were just hyper focused on, we're going to make this binding and do it really, really well. And they were
there
able
was a gap in the marketplace for it. Like there was a need for that more, like speaking to that crew of riders, that style of rider needed a binding that spoke to them.
Yeah, and they were on the ground, like innovating in real time. And they were able to like quickly get a really rad team because they didn't, if you're a binding only company, you're not competing with like riders, other sponsors. So you're able to get like really big riders because they're like,
you have the pick of the litter.
Who cares about bindings, whereas if you make snowboards and other things, then suddenly brands are like, I don't know, I want that head to toe deal kind of thing. So, but seeing this idea of binding innovations supporting, a binding only brand is kind of new and interesting.
Yeah. At the same time, we're talking really about like lowbacks and nobacks. Ride releases their horseshoe binding. This ate in mega waves. Like when people talk about binding history, they always refer to this binding. It was a baseless lowback binding. It was designed by Jake Blattner and Dave Hubach for Ride. And Seth Neary tells a story about how he remembers that like Jake and the Ride team came to Stratton and they were sitting in the parking lot kind of like crafting it up on a napkin, and they didn't come into the house until they like had perfected it. That's lore.
And the Ride team, sorry to interrupt, the Ride team had some energy around this time. There was
Rowan Rogers, Russell Winfield, Jason Ford, who am I forgetting? Jake Blattner. I mean,
Russell Winfield, who we'll talk to in a little bit. Yeah.
It was the coolest of the cool. It had a lot of energy, a big vibe around it. The cool thing about the horseshoe binding, the Ride horseshoe binding, is that Jake Blattner and Dave Hubach designed it, and they also held the patent for it. And Tim Pogue, who owned Ride Snowboards at the time, let them get royalties on that binding, which is kind of
That's cool,
unheard of.
Yeah, he was like, it was your idea. You can be a player, and that's awesome.
Yeah. So 95, 96, the Burton comes out with a lowback. They release this along with the Stumpy, a smaller boot that kind of goes with it in their catalog. And they have lowbacks, baseless, a torque binding with 3 straps. But by 1997, this trend is essentially dead. It's really interesting how quickly the lowbacks and nobacks came into the scene and were adopted. And then by 97, they're basically gone.
It was quick, but each year in sort of the passage of time during this period of like late 80s, 90s was like a million years, just in terms of how much snowboarding progressed, because it was like this explosion. So I know it feels fast, but if
on paper,
if Tech Nine is being released in 94, I mean, that's like 4 years. That's kind of a long time. I mean, not a long time for
it's a high school career.
But it's a whole high school career. I remember your feet having to be so strong during this period because you didn't have any support. Those boots, like they spent all this time building the boot and the binding up to support you. And then we took it all away and pared it all back and just changed the type of riding we were doing.
Yeah, and people were talking about riding those baseless bindings and being like, there was no support. You would land and be like, oh, thank you, low back, knees, whatnot, But yeah, so the low backs and and Novak sort of start to fade into existence. And Seth Neary, who rode for Nitro back in the day, had that epic smiley face pro model. He has this great story about riding lowbacks, being over in Europe, riding the pipe. Again, like they built highbacks for control. So he's riding the pipe out there with lowbacks and novaks. And then they look over and they see Terrier just like boosting. And he has these like giant skybacks that were even modified, like big highbacks, and had soccer shin guards shoved into them to make them taller.
Oh, wow.
And more support. And like he said, like immediately he's like, all right, game over.
This is dumb.
Yeah, we're done. If we want to go big in the half pipe, we need highbacks.
Yeah.
As a forward lean lover myself, and I love the skybacks and the highbacks. I'm also a pipe rider. It was hard for me to believe that the lowbacks and nobacks trend lasted as long as it did. But like you were saying, there was like a lot of different styles of snowboarding are coming on the scene. And, we kind of thought this whole nobacks thing was dead, but then there's some diehards out there like Mike Ranquet, like Mount Baker, hardcore legend. He wrote an article in 2008. Yeah, he's a god. He wrote an article for Snowboarder in 2008 called The Theory of Nobacks. He has a couple great quotes in there. One is, he says, the marketability and over-design of highback is matched only by their uselessness. In short, highbacks are archaic, expired training wheels that are rolling the sport into an evolutionary cul-de-sac. Like,
yes, this article is a hot take.
It's so
you
good.
You need to dip into this.
You need to read it. He also defends the nobacks on traverses, saying, when forced to traverse on the heels, even a caveman will learn to ride switch.
He's not wrong.
But also, when I was talking to Doyle, he said that JG, John Gert, who was a longtime Burton employee,
like
engineer, and so influential in the sport, he's like a fan of. He's like, you don't need snowboard bindings. You can snowboard without bindings.
Wow. Now, are they talking hard pack or are they talking deep powder? Because I think that's like the true question.
Yeah,
right?
agree. Yeah. Let's talk about hole patterns in the channel system. Jen, take it away.
Okay. Well, it's worth talking about how bindings got attached to snowboards, because that's not a straightforward thing either. Like everything had all its different like advancements and ins and outs. And so the hole pattern is the pattern of like kind of preset inserts that exist on a snowboard deck that you can hopefully match up in some mystical way with the hole pattern that exists on the binding base in a way that gives you the stance that you want. In terms of like how wide is it and what are your angles? You want like a bunch of angle on your front foot? Are you going duck stance? Are you going 0-0? What do you want? Once we have a single piece of basically a single plate as our base on the binding, the 5-hole pattern gets introduced, and that's the standard in the early 90s. You can see it in the Burton catalogs. You had 5 screws. And apparently you had about 50 options. So there's, the base plate just has a bunch of holes in it. And then, there's insert a hole pattern in the deck around like the kind of like where your toe would be and where your heel would be. And so there's a lot of like getting down on your hands and knees and trying to line it up and, praying that it works.
And being like, good enough.
Good enough, yeah. Most boards had a few stance options with pre-drilled holes, but Kemper and K2, you had to actually like mount the bindings yourself, so some assembly required. And you mounted them into plates. What are mounting plates, Tricia?
They're like a metal, my understanding is it's like a metal plate kind of in the sandwich of the snowboard making. So you've got your top sheet, you've got some fiberglass, then there's metal that you drill into, and then P-Tex and snow.
And snow. And so mounting plates would pull out, and if that happened, like you need to like go back to the T-bolt essentially. But, and they offered the mounting plates also like hemmed you into this much smaller stance, like the 18-inch stance was that kind of the widest they would go. So, at this time in the early mid 90s, like people want wider stances. So then they're already having to like kind of go back to the T-bolting idea basically to get what they want. In 1993, this is a big moment because it's the first time that, in our understanding that we're seeing a disc come into play in the base plate of the binding, and it's with the Burton 3D hole pattern. And so this idea, it stands for like three and then the disc. And so it's basically a rotating disc that has teeth in it that is in the center of the base plate. In that way, all you need to really find is the width that you want, and then using the disc you can turn the bindings to the basically to the angle you want. So it really like allowed a lot more and made it a lot easier. Apparently this technology accommodated 2,073,600 different stance options. They did the math, apparently. And this Bresci's Fish Pro model that we all reference and talk about, that's the first year he had a pro model. It offered this.
So 93 is a big year for the 3D pattern, but at the same time, their four-hole pattern comes out, and it was introduced shortly after Burton had introduced the 3D, sort of a response to Burton having a proprietary piece of binding technology. And so the consensus is that Harry Guns, who worked at F2, he had developed a 4 centimeter by 4 centimeter hole pattern and disc binding in 1993. He owned Crazy Banana before creating Radical Airlines, which along with
Rad
F2,
Air.
Rad Air, along with F2, they introduced the 4x4, the four-hole pattern to the world. And we also need to give a little note that GNU technically had the first commercial four-hole pattern, but it was a much wider hole pattern, and they used quarter 20 hardware, which was not the standard for most bindings, so LibTech doing things their own way per usual.
For sure. And we should talk about kind of what's going on here, which is that Burton, one of the biggest snowboard companies that exists at this time, has this proprietary technology that you can only mount a Burton binding to a Burton board, because the 3D, that whole pattern, the triple screws that you would put in, they needed to match the triple insert pattern that would be on the deck of the snowboard. So it's a little bit like Apple and Macs, and like you buy an iPhone, now you need to buy the Thunderbolt and all that. It becomes like proprietary, and you're kind of like you're sucked into the whole system. But they did come out with, like, usually when you bought Burton bindings, you would get a four pattern disc
Eventually.
as well.
Yeah.
Eventually, because they realized like, oh, people want to use Burton bindings on other people's snowboards.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, they paired it with they threw another disc in the box basically that had the four-hole pattern. So if you didn't have a Burton board, you could still use it. We should talk about the channel system. So my first experience with the channel system was a bit of a light bulb moment, would you call it, or more like maybe like a hallelujah moment, because it suddenly made this kind of like awkward puzzle of mounting your bindings and laboring over like, oh, that stance isn't quite right, or I can't get it, or now the binding's too far
Jamming
forward,
the
or
screw
whatever.
into the wrong pivot.
Yeah, and having to switch it, remount your bindings if you want to set your stance back for powder or whatever. The now trademark Burton channel system basically, uses one screw, and it attaches to one insert that slides up and down a channel that's set into the top sheet. So, and there's a disc with teeth, kind of like
Isn't
we were
it two
talking about
screws?
before.
Am I crazy?
2 screws makes sense, but it's the same idea. There's a disc associated so you can get the angles you want, and then you basically slide that shit up and down until you get it exactly how you want it. And think of, like, you can nudge. You can be like, I want another millimeter or something, and see, like, you can literally get in any stance you want, and it makes it so easy. And Burton brought this to market in 2007, but it was actually like a lot of the other technology that we're going to talk about. It was invented and dabbled with by players starting in the 80s.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about it.
So in January of 1984, Matt Nipper, who started Aggression Snowboards, we mentioned Tarquin Robbins rode for them, Rocket Reeves, some Colorado legends, Dave Dowd. And this is when, they're still futzing around with the highback. He made a highback basically out of ski boots, and then he did the slider channel system too at this time. This had 2 tracks, not just like one track or one channel like the Burton one has now. So yeah, like he had like the double whammy of the highback and the slider channel system. I wonder why that didn't get widely adopted.
Yeah. I mean, just I think with technology, everything might not have worked as easily as it does now with the technology we have to make the materials
Right.
and the slide and the ease of all that and production.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And we also need to mention Ernie DeLost, he was a partner of Chuck Barfoot's in the 70s, and he left Barfoot in the early 80s to create Snowtech. And in 1985, he released the Snowboard Quantum by Snowtech, which is basically the first commercially available slider channel system.
Yeah, Ernie had like that engineer mindset. Tom Sims was an engineer, but he had that surf skate, and Jake was more of a surfer ski. And the reason why most of us haven't heard of Ernie DeLoss is he just didn't have the team or notoriety. He was also out of New Jersey, which is known for one mountain, Mountain Creek.
The other side of the river. Mm-hmm.
Vernon Valley hardcore. But he was a forward thinker, and in 1991, he started Taylor Dykem Factory in San Diego. So he's still a player in the sport. This is where Lamar, Barfoot, Arbor, Joyride, World Industries, and H Street are all made there. So
Mm-hmm.
just like interesting side note about Ernie and some of the early players in the sport. In 1994, Rev Snowboards David Partridge said that the channel was invented by me.
Who's got two thumbs and invented the channel system? This guy.
But there's a quote. He said, the channel was invented by me in 94 at the Rev Factory in Vancouver. It was inspired by an adjustable windsurfing fin box, which is cool when you think about if you don't know what the slider looks like. That's a really good mental picture of what it is. And he said that Jeremy Jones was responsible for moving it from Rev. He was a team rider along with JP Walker and JF Pelchat, who started Now Bindings. And Jeremy went to Forum, and he also eventually rode for Burton. So, Dave's saying that the main reason behind it was a quick adjustability on powder days, infinite stance options, and it eliminated the need for so many inserts.
Really interesting that Street Jeremy Jones, we should say, Utah Jeremy Jones is kind of a player in bringing this technology from a small brand Rev to, kind of through his sponsors. Like he sees this, dude, this is like changing the game. Like, let's do this. So, as you said, he brings it to Forum. They had a 2-channel system, so not a 1-channel system, but Forum comes out with it in the 96, 97 season. And then, Burton, there's this great consolidation that happens in the snowboard industry around, kind of early 2000s. It's hard for small players to make it. So Burton buys Forum, and, Forum kind of becomes under the Burton entity, and they get their access to their technology. And a couple years later, 3 years later, in 2007 is when Burton releases the channel mount, kind of their proprietary version of the channel mounting system, and they release it with his pro model, kind of halfway through the season, basically.
So now we've kind of covered how the bindings stay on the snowboard, so do you want to talk about the toe cap?
I remember the advent of the toe cap. I was like, this is so helpful. It was a small, subtle, yet quietly kind of groundbreaking innovation in a way. So this is our boys over at Tech9 again. They introduced the Baltimore cap. It's a toe strap that basically is a cap that cups your toe. And what it does is it pulls your foot down, but also back. So up until this time, a toe strap just went over the top of your toe. And I remember this, don't you remember this, Tricia? Cranking down your bindings at the top of the half pipe to, you're basically like, come on, one more ratchet.
Stay in there.
Give me more support. And basically you'd get them so tight, they'd be crushing your toe, and you would just lose circulation in your toes, but it didn't make you not slosh around in your bindings and stuff. So this was actually really cool because it just pushed you back into your heel cup. Because one of the things that would happen is you'd slop around in your bindings, you'd get kind of heel lift and things like that. And then it just wasn't as the performance wasn't as good. So this came from, the story goes that Justin Hebel and Mark Frank Montoya, who both were riding for Tech9, they were taking chin straps from football helmets and retrofitting their bindings. And so, Tech9's like, let's make it. And then, of course, Burton saw it and was basically like, we're doing that.
We have a great idea.
They produced it and brought it to the masses, basically.
A lot of people that I talked to researching this episode, they highlighted that as one of the key innovations in binding technology that changed the game for them. I feel your pain and felt your pain back in the day, but when I got the toe cap, I was like, oh, this is cool.
You're like, meh.
I mean, I don't know. Again, like I'm semi clueless to what's going on my binding, the binding front.
Tricia, talk about your experience with, because did you always just ride Burton bindings, even though you never rode for Burton?
Yeah, I had Burton bindings, and this was a trend and a theme in the pro circuit. Like everybody rode Burton bindings, and when I asked Doyle, I was like, I know I did, Barrett did, like everyone. I'm like,
Even
why?
though like Barrett's riding for Mervin, she should be riding bent metal,
right?
Yeah.
But he said it's just like the fit, the boot and the binding and the way that they fit and the way that they performed and the comfort, like you're kind of talking about, it was just unbeatable at that time. And now, everyone can make a really solid, good snowboard binding. Yes, there's better ones out there for sure. But at that time, it really was the only thing that you wanted to trust your snowboarding career in,
Yeah.
He even talks about like, Doyle has some great stories about Terrier and Craig and how they were really resistant to any of the upgrades and changes. Like Terrier did not want the slap ratchet binding because they didn't want to fuck with their shit. They wanted to make sure that they knew it worked and didn't want to test around on some things that might be less
effective.
solid. They're jumping off big things and all that. But yeah, I didn't know that the highback can shift to work with the stance that you're working at, so you have comfort. Like I did not know this.
Like
Kelly,
you can shift it around. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, that's a huge innovation and in binding technology. And I remember Kelly being like, do you want me to change your bindings? Because I had just taken them out of the box and put them on my snowboard. She's like, and then she like pivoted them for me. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Like it didn't occur to me that pain in my leg was something I should be addressing.
You're just running with it.
So this episode has been a real mind bender for me.
Well, let's talk. We can't talk about bindings without talking about this the step-in discussion. Let's talk about it. Like, what do we mean by it? It's basically a binding you don't need straps on, I would say. One you can just like walk right up to your snowboard and go click, click, and you're in. And does that remind you of anything, Tricia?
Clickers, baby.
No, well, I was going to say it reminds me of skiing. Yeah. Like that's how skis operate basically. Like we've got a lot of versions of this out there right now, most famously the Burton Step-On. But this technology, not unlike the things like the channel, it goes back a long time and it's been innovated on for decades. So let's talk about the clicker.
Yeah.
This is launched in 1995 by K2 Snowboards. And we should mention that same year, actually, that device owned by Dave and Rick Alden and Switch owned by Tommy Guerrero's brother, and Jeff Sand, they launched step-in systems too. But the big one's the clicker. So let's talk about that one. That was created by Shimano, a Japanese bike component company. They're doing like, if you think like clipless pedals on bikes, and they're just super innovative and Japanese engineering nerds, basically. And they partner with K2 on this product that they branded the clicker. And, all of these systems focus on like basically putting the binding and boot together and fusing it so that, the boot needs to, again, start carrying all the stiffness that the binding and all the support really that the binding offered you before. And what's on the board is just this like interface that you would click into. So there's no highback or anything. It's all within the body of the boot. What's that?
I was just going to say, like, that's the era when like Athena, E-Tree, like there's a style that came with the clicker.
Yeah, I remember. And these are our dear friends.
Yeah.
Athena, we rode with so much, E-Tree, Chris Engelsman, and Travis Parker. And like, you could totally tell if someone was riding clickers because they did not laterally flex. You looked bull-legged. And it was widely known.
Hot
like,
take.
It was widely, I don't think it's that hot of a take. Like, I feel like everyone kind of understood. You've talked to Athena, right, about it?
Yeah, Athena, I talked to Athena about this, and she was dusting off the cobwebs on her memory, but she's like, people always just, they got a lot of questions, and she always felt like people were looking at them like, oh, those are so cool. What are those things? But I
Okay.
know definitely, I can hear in my head, people were like, oh, the clicker, the style stealer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. You're basically clunking around the lodge in ski boots, really. And then that inability to kind of flex in a way that, think of what the bone out strap like was attempting to give you. Did she like them?
She liked him. She said she didn't feel like it inhibited her style or her riding at all. And then
Oh, cool.
Dennis Nazari, who he's owned Salty Peak Snowboard Shop in Salt Lake, he is like a diehard. When they went out of business, he bought up as many as he could get, and he's basically been riding them since the 90s. And he's
Oh,
like
that's
swears
wild.
by them, and it's like they're the best thing ever.
Somebody loves them. I love it. Amazing. Well,
Listen, I think we
can't
need to say we've never ridden them, so we don't actually know.
That's totally what I was
Yeah.
going to say. We were really locked into like what we had access to through our sponsors. So
Yeah.
it was a bit of like it was very kind of like compartmentalized in terms of like we had what we could ride and then we had what we heard basically about the other equipment.
And what we thought was cool collectively. So 1996 also Flow enters the market with their easy entry bindings. So they started a binding company but went on to make boots. So they kind of did a reverse pivot on the binding to boards. So they went on to make boots and boards with Finnish riders like Antti Audi, Risto Matala, Mike Bassage, Sharka.
Mike Bassage isn't a Finnish rider. He's snuck in with those
neither is
fins.
Sharka. She's from the Czech Republic.
That's right.
But they rode these boards. The difference here is that any boot can go into the system. So it's a little bit like a clamshell, like you step into it and then you ratchet the binding up behind your boot. So it's like a water ski binding, maybe like a current one where it just fits a little bit snugger, but you're snapping it up from the back.
Okay.
And that's sort of what's out in the scene at that point. In 99, Burton's Step In hits the market. This is a soft boot binding that you it's like a boot binding combo. So despite having a binding with a highback, it still suffers from the functionality problems. As it's not as good as their other bindings. Like we said, Burton had this space in the marketplace where they're making the best bindings ever, and then they came out with the Step In, and it's just not landing where it needs to land for the riders. And Jake Burton and the whole team really like focused on what the riders wanted, and it just wasn't really working. The other thing about the Step In, when it came out in 99, how it didn't really have this, it didn't get wide adoption, except for apparently in Japan. They loved it and still love it. But it also had that problem of like shop owners didn't know how to support it because you had to buy the boot and the binding. So you're like, how many size 9s with the medium base plate, where the clicker, the same base plate worked on every boot. So
it was just a bit more universal and functional. And
So in 2005, Burton Fusion is released, and this works with any boot, but you're basically wearing your binding around off the snow. So again, it has that like ski vibe, and you're just walking around with a highback in the base lodge.
Nerd alert.
Yeah. So then by 2007, the Step In is off the Burton menu altogether, and the clicker goes out of production in 2009. So it kind of had a moment, and then it went away. And we'll talk about like why did these things fail?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is the performance. Like they did not flex laterally enough. That was what caused the, clicker style or whatever. And so, and in addition to that, you were mentioning like you've got to pair up the boot and binding. Like it's this commitment suddenly that you need to invest in like the whole system because you have to buy the boot and the binding. It's $600 or whatever for the full setup.
Yeah. And there's like no buy-in from the pro riders, and that really was driving the trends then. But like Burton can't let go of the idea of the Step On. And as we're like an aging community of snowboarders, there might be a different need. Plus technology and laser printing is coming into play. So in 2016, they developed the first Step On prototypes, and these are tested and they debut in the market in 2018. And so what makes them different is that just the technology, the comfort, the support, and the performance is so much
Like they
better.
got it right.
Yeah.
Third time's a charm. Second time's a charm.
12th time's the charm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in 2018, the step-on binding system comes out, makes its debut. The step-on is actually taking off right now. It feels
It's
like
huge.
we have a lot of our elder statesmen and women population in snowboarding are transitioning to that.
And little kids. Like, it's
and
great
yeah.
for kids, you know, because it's
Get
like
up
the
and
whole
go.
thing with like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's like letting riders exit the chairlift. You can step right on your board and go. You know, you don't need to sit down. And I feel like it just speaks to a little bit more. Is it like snowboarders are becoming more they're not snowboarders, they're like recreational riders, and this maybe speaks to that more?
Yeah, we should talk about, there's sort of a debate or a culture, let's call it a
Yeah.
cultural conversation around like the step on, but it's not the only one, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's an energy right now of like, actually a bunch of other brands have, you know, if the Burton step on had the right formula, like there's other brands out there that have pretty good ones too.
Yeah. So Now Bindings has a step on or step in. Nidecker, Supermatic, which is similar to the Flow setup. Rome has a binding. And then Clue Bindings, which is like straight from Instagram. They have a step on that they offer. So
Yeah.
it's a part of the binding culture now. It's no longer a fad, and there is a lot of buy-in from the community.
Yeah. And so back to that cultural conversation. And speaking of Instagram, like, there is a ton of, I don't know, I've seen a lot of memes in my
Sure.
feed about like kind of clowning on like
Yeah.
step-ons or just step-ins essentially. I think the term step-in we'll just say is like broad, like not
Yeah.
a not Burton-owned thing, but just the broad idea that you don't need to like bend down and take a little time. You don't have to sit on the snow. Like, it's basically bindings that get rid of that part of it.
Yeah.
You know, and the people kind of clowning on this idea, they're saying essentially like you're fixing something that isn't broken.
Yeah.
Like, regular bindings work good, you know, and you may need to do some of those things like bend over and take time at the top of the lift and like all of that stuff. It takes a little time. I totally understand why, you know, innovators are looking for a different, you know, kind of a better way, because they have to ask the question, like, can we make it? I mean, snowboarding's progressive. Of course they want to progress, but I think what's happening is it's hitting something deeper. It's like hitting on something that isn't about technology at all, but just about identity in a way that like having to strap in is what makes us snowboarders. Like, maybe it doesn't, you know, because it's like maybe you know, like you click in and it doesn't take any time, but like, who cares? Like, what are you going to get that many more runs? Like, maybe you will. Maybe you'll get 10 more runs. I don't know. But it's like, I don't know. I think it's just asking the question, like, do we need that? And is this taking things towards skiing in a way that feels uncomfortable for some, I think. You know, I've talked about this with you before, you know, that Lindsey Vonn, who's like one of like the most famous ski racers of all time. She was, I heard her say in an interview, she was like, I'm almost positive it was her. She said, snowboarders are annoying. They get in the way at the top of the lift. You're trying to like ski off the lift. They're everywhere. They're sitting down, strapping into their bindings. And it was like, fuck you. Like, I know the snowboarder versus skier debate is like an old head debate, kind of, that young people like that's not how they think of it. But it's also like okay to bend over and strap in. Like, it's okay. So it's just, yeah, maybe having to sit down is part of what makes us a snowboarder. Like,
I can't wait for you to try them and be like, actually, these things are pretty sweet.
I'm not saying that this is what I believe. I'm just saying I think that could be what's at, you know, like, it's about less about the technology and more like about the identity. I haven't, like you said, like, I haven't tried them. So, I mean, I get that, like, yeah, step in right away. Like, I understand the appeal.
But there is like a piece of your core that feels like the old head snowboard core that's like, ooh, can't go there.
Yeah, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but like I've been noticing, among like meeting people that, started snowboarding more recently
Yeah.
and, are interested in like backcountry snowboarding and splitboarding. I've heard this several times. Like, I think I might start skiing actually because
Yeah.
it's like a faster way to access the backcountry. Like, it's so much faster to transition and things like that. And I'm just like, what? I mean, I'm not going to do that. I'm not a skier. And it just really, you realize the way coming up in the, starting snowboarding when we did, it was really about identity in a way
Yeah.
that now isn't.
It's
So
not there. Yeah.
another, kind of moment in the history of bindings is union binding. So George Kleckner, former pro rider from like the early days on Joyride, and he went on to like work in marketing. He teams up with an Italian tech engineering scientist named Marcin Fumagalli and Aaron. I'm imagining that's how you pronounce it. And then our friend Aaron Draplin, who's a graphic design god. And this was in the early 2000s. They started Union. And it was to just like, again, it was this idea of focusing solely on bindings, which, we've seen a few brands do well and then branch out and whatnot. And they wanted to do it differently. They felt that like all the other bindings were like kind of teamed up as part of this full snowboard package or like designed to fit a really specific snowboard. So they wanted to do something that was a little bit different, create something that was lightweight, yet strong, yet comfortable, like all this stuff. And they have like a really sick team. It's Danny Cass, it's Travis Rice, it's Jess Kimura. It's like all the best of the best. And it was a little bit of that, that thing that Tech Nine was able to do, where they're only a little binding company, so they can really go and poach these amazing riders that they probably have a full like deal with, Travis Rice rides for GNU, but it's not like, it's not going to feel like competition to GNU that he has a binding sponsor. So they're able to like cherry pick these great riders. And I liked, they just released a little sort of like homage history video. And, George Kleckner told this awesome story that, I don't know, it like really perked my ears that he was like, in the years that they were, those initial years, his approach was like, I want to give all the team riders white bindings and only the team riders could have white bindings. So suddenly, suddenly they really stand out in like videos and photos. They had like the big Draplin's big like Union U logo. Yeah. And so they were very, they really caught your eye, and it was kind of like reclaiming
that space.
Or claiming, not reclaiming, claiming the binding as an aspirational piece of gear that you could like covet, It wasn't like, I feel like bindings are forgotten about, even though, as we've discussed over the course of this podcast, they're so important. So, all of a sudden you have people noticing and going like, ooh, those like tasty white bindings, like I want those. And that felt like a new idea.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting because now they are making boots. So suddenly they're expanding into new categories. So, no doubt that's going to create change in terms of, team riders that can and can't be on the team and whatnot. But just a good example of like, they had a solid like 25 years or 20 years of doing just bindings, meaning like we're going to do one thing and we're going to do it
well,
real good.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So we've come a long way from no bindings to every kind of innovation or brain cockeyed scheme for the binding. There's constant tweaking and things coming. So it'll be interesting to see, what happens in the future, I guess.
But yeah, and we've come a long way, but we were talking about how in some ways we haven't. Like that modern binding, like we said,
we're still riding
highback, toe and heel strap, a base plate, like that thing's been around for 40 years. It's endured. And, I do wonder if like in another 40 years we'll be like, remember those nostalgics who used to strap in or something? It's like us thinking about cars and going like, remember how you used to like have to lift up the hood and like crank the engine on the old Model A Fords or something? Like it'll be interesting. It feels like we're at an inflection point, and what will happen to this? What's the modern binding going to look like in 40 years?
So today we're talking to Russell Winfield, who's a bona fide OG and legendary pro. Started snowboarding in the 80s back east with yours truly, part of the Ride Snowboards A team, and made such a huge impact on snowboarding in the 90s for progression and style. Now, Russell Winfield is a multi-hyphenate, apparel creative director, style icon, and guest of our podcast. Let's go, Russ.
Most importantly, guest of your podcast. Thank you both for allowing me the space.
So, Russell, you were just telling a story about the first time you met Tricia and the gear you were riding. Let's let that run back through again, because that was
let's first start about the first time I met Tricia, who
Okay.
had on. We're just going to go through a quick
Yeah, let's do an outfit check for
Style.
sure.
outfit recap. It was a thermal shirt under, like a t-shirt. It was probably like OP or some cool
I like
something,
that.
with shorts and
Oh.
long johns, like neon long johns, with the
Huh.
Burton boots that were like tan leather and brown on the bottom. And I was like,
Yes.
and probably a headband.
Definitely a headband. No hats.
Yeah.
What was happening with the weather?
The
It
weather
sounds
was
like
freezing.
a wet butt.
Cold AF. Cold AF.
Yeah, it was cold.
Okay.
So now to less important stuff, the binding. Burton had the one like the water ski binding and then the rubber band. And then the next iteration was just like a toe strap that was attached to the board and like a heel cup. And that's when I entered the game. They had a mid-season update where you could get them to rivet in these really long, clear plastic highbacks. You remember
Yeah.
those?
Yeah.
But I didn't have that. I waited till the next year and
That
got
was like the milk jug highback that they kind of put on because they had seen the HYBAKS highbacks from Jeff Grell out west and kind of like had a last minute epiphany.
Yeah, they were like, "Ooh, we blew it. Let's fix this."
Take us into that world of like, what was that like riding that binding compared to like
going no
today?
highback to highback, yeah.
Well, I'd like to liken it to not having electricity and then all of a sudden having electricity. It is what it is. Like
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know.
You don't
You're like,
know any better, right? Like you're like, oh shoot! Like I was just happy that it was strapped to my feet.
Yeah.
That's how primitive it was. We kind of hit it right at the sweet spot. Maybe a few years too early. If we would have been like in the Peter Line thing, we might have made a little bit more money. But
Totally.
but where we were was cool because we got to like we saw this graph of it go from like this to like technology and innovation. Just it was like
like a bell
every
curve.
year
Yeah.
it was just crazy. So it went from like that to I remember the Sims. I think after that I rode like a barfoot that had like the modified Sims bindings
Yeah.
where the Sims bindings went like this, right? They were supposed to like you're supposed to lock them on the outside.
Yep.
And I remember a lot of people, and I think maybe your brother locked him on the inside. Like people had their own
Oh.
little weird way of doing
Tweaking
it.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, because like locking him on the outside would kind of get you flat, but locking him on the inside would like pseudo cant your feet a little bit. So you could be inside. You could get your Craig leg good, your back knee would get
Yeah.
in there. Um, After that, I went to the Sims bindings on a look board. And then
I remember
Burton,
that era of you.
that era was
What was he
It was
wearing,
so
Tricia?
sick.
like,
Just like
bro.
a descente, a descente
You
suit.
were a
Oh,
one
and-
piece?
I had a
Oh.
level one piece
Yeah.
with the
that's what it was.
headband and the mini dreads and like
Yeah.
some big ass boleys doing hand plants at the bottom of the pipe.
And the look had the cutouts on the nose. Yeah.
Yeah,
for
the nose
extra
and
tweak.
tail.
Yeah.
The trick stick. I rode the little one too, 100 miles per hour. And it was literally a saucer. Like it had rocker and it was like concave. So it was
The
just
original
like,
rocker unintentionally.
yeah, it was like you had to really lean it over to get on edge, but didn't really care about it. It's just like high speed skittering to everything, right?
Not much carving going on.
No, that was for the morning when Susie made us a race.
That was
yes.
awesome.
Well, you talked about a little bit where we sort of talked about the like little mods and hacks and things like that. Were there any throughout any of this time period you remember doing to get like the bindings to like perform better or just
Well,
ride better?
so many. We'll just use like we'll take the whole foot, right? So in the race boot, we'd use Reichley's, which are
Yeah.
still big boots. They're like the full tilts now. The K2s we cut because they're two piece. So you pull the top piece off and you cut the bottom piece like in the back further out, so it's softer. Um,
Oh,
we would do
Oh,
that.
yeah.
And then we would this is probably the year like with the mystery air year. First you would shift your highbacks, right? This was the year before
Trisha
the
learned about that
I learned that
recently.
in 2007.
really?
I'm like,
Trish.
I
She's
was
So
a
at you
was
fresh out
guys.
the
just
box
doing
kind of
it
girl.
You
for
guys were taking care of me, to be honest. Like, I went straight from like the Stratton crew basically hooking me up with like wax and tuning to the US team. So, yeah, it took me a little while to figure out what's
to
going
figure
on with
out,
my
oh
own
wow.
equipment.
Yeah, you're like, wow, my highbacks are weird. It's like Trish, it's been like that since 90.
Totally.
Really? So we'd spin the highbacks to be like parallel, I guess it's called, perpendicular with the edge,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And then we would drill the ankle strap down lower onto the flat part of the
Oh.
binding so that
Oh.
you could get a little bit more tweak in there.
Oh,
It's
okay.
all about the
Yes.
tweak.
So
It
what
was
were some grabs that you were like we were just reviewing the 1991 Burton catalog and Brushy's just doing these insane
Taipans,
Yeah.
Japans, mutes, everything was tuck knee
Were you
or
doing
like
that shit?
of course,
Yeah.
like that was it. Like especially back east, all we had was a half pipe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was good. Like when it was good, everybody was there. Like and you'd know. And be like, it's good. They're cutting the
You're like,
pipe.
"What was that?"
Lyle's here.
Oh,
Yeah.
the
Run up
yellow
to the burn house.
backhoes
Yeah.
going.
Totally.
Lyle's in the pipe today. It's gonna be so sick tomorrow. Trevor's
And
coming up tomorrow night.
totally. That was a scene.
Yeah,
Oh my
it
gosh.
was. Good
Do you
times.
remember cutting down, like, to go into the lowback era? Do you remember cutting down bindings?
Yeah, so I think probably because I'm an East Coast guy, I like my timeline all starts with like where the Burton was. Like
Yeah,
that's my
same.
product timeline
Yeah.
until Ride, of course. Um, so it was the black freestyle binding with the white high back in the air.
Yep.
And Burton, as much as they loved freestyle, they had such a race heritage. I believe that everything they did had to have like you had to be able to turn like use the high back fully to turn and like we were like, but it's just too much and I can't tweak well. It's too much high back. So we would cut the high backs down. Um and like with most things in life, like that just got taken way too far by people. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
like it got back to no back and that really wasn't either.
Do you remember when the horseshoe ride binding came into play and sort of the development of that binding?
Yeah. So everything that we had going was because we were trying to achieve something. And like the bindings, the base plates were so thick and we just wanted to skateboard, right? And so skateboarders got to feel their boards. And so we figured that riding rails and doing all the stuff we were doing, we wanted to feel the board. So we didn't see a need for a base plate.
Yeah.
We were like, we'll get better board feel if we don't, like we wore the airwalk boots, the low tops with the wetsuit sock that was a liner. So it was just like a Sorel with a wetsuit sock, and it was about that tall. The whole
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're
boot.
basically wearing shoes.
It was pretty sick. I'm not
Warm
gonna lie.
shoes. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't even really that warm because they would leak, and then it would just be like wetsuit sock foot
Oh, yeah.
wet.
Swamp foot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So Jake and Hubach designed the horseshoe binding, and it was pretty funny. Like I remember being at Jackson Hole, like when we first got the prototypes, and we had to put duct tape over how the attachment because that was the secret sauce.
Oh.
Oh, because you didn't want other people to see it.
See it,
Oh.
yeah. But we were riding it, so like I remember being on the gondola for this Transworld thing, and Tony Magnuson was like staring at my board, like looking at it, and I was like, "Yeah, you don't know what's under there, bro." And we had like the low backs, kind of funny because we put forward lean activator thingies in there. It's like you're not gonna like what
On
you
the
gotta look
lowback.
at. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
I love
Um,
the image of you in the Jackson Hole gondola too, like heading up to ride like fucking steep ass
Steep
terrain,
powder.
big
with
mountain
with
terrain.
no highbacks.
No highbacks and a 150. Like just jumping off everything, didn't care.
I want to hear a little more about like the world that like fed into this baseless binding, because like I remember you and I met when you're living in the Vale Valley. You were living up the road from me. Hijinks ensued. You guys spun out into our pasture or something on a snowy
Probably.
night after the bars closed. My dad rolled out with a gun and was like, "Who the fuck are these people?" But anyway,
We're your
I
neighbors, sir.
I
We
just
don't mean any harm.
I just remember it being just the energy around like what Tarquin was bringing in and stuff, of it being about like, yeah, just jibbing. Was that kind of what fed into this idea of like baseless bindings?
Well, yeah, I think it's like it was all just part of what the whole thing is, which was just like progression. Like we wanted to progress everything. And we didn't care what everybody else was doing. Like we were like, this is what we're doing. This is why. And the longer you live, the more you're like, well, there's people that are going to sit there and just follow. And then there's people that are just going to go and do their own thing. And once you become successful doing your own thing, then you become the followed, right? So
Yeah.
everybody saw us doing this stuff and ride booths at the trade shows and our boards and the bindings and the apparel. And it's like, everybody's like, well, that's working. So we don't got to think about it. We just need to do that.
Back to that binding. What was it like to ride? Did it fulfill on its promise?
It did. You can definitely feel the snow more under your foot with no piece of plastic, which is, not crazy to think. And the thing is, none of the bindings were comfortable.
Yeah,
Truth.
agree.
So it's just like these days, I'm just like Cadillac, right? Like I'm out there just like, I also wore boots that were 2 sizes too small so that I could fit onto a narrower board. These days,
Yeah.
I'm like, we go a
You don't
half
need
size.
to. Yeah.
You don't need to. I go a half size. I wear like a size 10 boot, full size. But there were so many other important things than comfort,
Yeah.
right? It was style,
I mean, let's
being
be
able to
honest,
do
that
your
was first.
trick. Yeah, that was it. It was
Styles
pretty
first.
much all about style and how you like it was now snowboarding, it seems like how many,
Yeah.
and back then it was how,
Yeah.
right? And neither is superior. It's just a different way of looking at the same situation. But I think because of the lack of age of the sport, the how was more important because we could control the element that allowed us to do it a certain way.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
now kids aren't. I don't know too many kids that understand side cut radius or chords or any of that. They're just like, give me that one, and I'm going to go send it off that thing, and I'm going to spin it around 8 times, and
They
I'm going
don't
to go
have
fix.
to. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all done for them. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Like there was bad equipment back in the day, and now it's like even the worst stuff is totally rideable, you know?
Oh
Like
yeah,
there's
it's
so
all
much
good.
comfort and so much like it's been tweaked to perfection almost.
Yeah, I mean now they have the step ins and step ons and step throughs and step overs and all sorts of different iterations of that. And maybe when I'm 70, I'll need that, but I'm until now I'm strapping on, bro.
Were you guys aware of like the Tech 9 baseless bindings?
Oh, we were years before that.
Ah, okay.
We were
You
the
were first.
first.
All right. Okay.
Come on, Jen Sharowski.
It's a
The
little
internet is confusing, my
it's
friend.
a little hazy when
It's
you're
not hazy to me. Like I don't even
beautiful.
think Tech 9 was a brand when we first had our first.
When did it
our
come
first
out? When was your first prototype?
92?
Oh yeah, that was
Okay.
before.
I don't know if this is the truth or not, but I know that Jake and Hubach sold the technology. So like all wakeboards use the base technology from the horseshoe binding, or used
Oh.
to at least.
Hopefully they made some money from that.
I would imagine.
Let's talk a little bit about the binding as a thing. Like, is it important to snowboarding? Like, what would we have done if the binding never coalesced and we were back there with like straps and water ski boots and shit like that.
We'd be at the
I
golf
mean,
course.
yeah, it probably would have been great, honestly. Like, there wouldn't have been any Olympics or anything like that. But I think just like with everything, the technology needs to keep happening because people need to keep selling stuff, right? I still to this day like mess with my bindings. Like I very rarely like get a pair of bindings and just stick them on. Like I'll use this base plate from this one and take a high back from another binding in the line and put the straps on from another binding in the line. Like I like a really stiff base plate and a
Yeah.
really soft high back because I like to snowboard with my feet.
So you're like riding the torsional flex. That's cool. I think the binding's kind of mysterious, because if something is just a connector piece of equipment but it is so crucial and important. Like you're saying, you want to dial it in and tune it in, but there's a lot of complex technology going on with it. I don't know if people know how to think about it. It's not like an aspirational piece of equipment that people are like, "Did you get the new blah blah blah?"
I
You know?
yeah,
Well,
I
it
yeah, go ahead.
is though these
Yeah.
days, right? Like, did you get the Union Falcor, Travis Rice's bro, the Falcor thing in the back with the graphite whoop de whoop and the injection mold and the blah 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 and the Burton Cartel or the Ride A7, but you could ride the 8. Uh,
You're right.
It's
I'm
the
wrong
mat-
because I'm not a like tech person.
We're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
tech
totally.
enough
You're
to
right.
yeah, or
I am
tweakers, yeah.
such a tech nerd.
That's why
Like
we brought you in, Russell.
I'm such a
Yeah.
gear, like I love the design stuff. I love to know why, right? And I like to do certain things that are gonna make it work different. And if you're not that person, you probably have a pair of something from 10 years ago, and you know what? You probably wouldn't know the difference.
Are
To
you
be
feeling seen, Trisha?
I mean, if it works and your feet don't hurt, then don't
I think
change
that's
it.
the thing, like, we've gotten to a point where our feet don't hurt, but, like, the binding along the way was so important, kind of what you're talking about, where you're tweaking it and testing it and trying to find like, collectively, the snowboard community was trying to find the binding that was gonna solve foot pain, give you control, give you flex, give you stiffness, whatever you want, what you
Yeah.
need out of it, and I feel like that's the history of the binding is that we've evolved it to a point where there is sort of like there's a baseless in the Burton line now, and there's a step on, and there's something for everyone, but like we're all staying in our own lane, riding our own thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like cars. Like not everybody wants a sports car. Not everybody wants a pickup. Not everybody wants an SUV, but they have them all, and so everybody can get what they want. That's going to work for them, right?
But
And
like back then, it was like we all just want the
a
station wagon.
comfortable binding, yeah.